Hi and welcome. I'm Gavin Lon. This is the 10th part and the penultimate video in a video series dedicated to building a shopping cart application on .NET 6. So we are nearly finished building our shopping cart application. In this video, we are going to create functionality so that a user can filter the products in our store's product catalog by product category. We'll write code to query our database for all the product categories within our database and display them as menu items in the main menu contained within the sidebar section of our UI. When the user clicks one of the menu items denoting a product category, data representing the products related to that category will be appropriately displayed to the user. For content like this and much more, please consider subscribing, and please ring the bell so as to be notified of future content. If you like this video, please hit the like button, and please feel free to share this video with anyone you feel may benefit from its content. If you'd like to thank me by buying me a coffee, I've included a link to my Buy Me a Coffee webpage. Any support is of course greatly appreciated. Right, let's get started. So in the first part of this course, we created our database through EF Core Code First migrations. A requirement to update the database's seed data or structure may arise, for example, due to a decision to include new functionality within the application, or perhaps just to correct a minor mistake made when the database was first created and seeded with data. Through EF Core Code First migrations, we have the agility that we need to make appropriate adjustments to our database during the development and testing phases of our application. So before we start writing code, we need to address a database-related requirement. We need to add a new column to the product categories database table where we can store relevant CSS code that denotes an icon used to represent a product category. We are, of course, going to use EF Core Code First migrations to address this requirement. So let's first update the product category entity class to include a new string property. And let's appropriately name our new property Icon CSS. We are going to need an appropriate DTO, data transfer object, to house the data that we send back to the client for when a client makes a request to the server for a collection of product category data. So let's go to the shoponline.models project and create an appropriate class to represent the relevant DTO. Let's go back to the shoponline.api project. Before we generate the relevant migration code, let's open the shoponline.db context class and update the relevant code for seeding our database within the onModelCreating method. So here we are including relevant font awesome CSS classes within the new field named Icon CSS. These classes will be appropriately referenced within our code to render appropriate icon images for each of the relevant product categories. So let's create our migration. And give it a sensible name. Great. Let's look at the migration code that we have just generated. Great. Let's run our migration through the update-database command. Excellent. So let's go to our shoponline.api project. So if we look at the product repository class, we can see that we have already written the code for returning a collection of product category objects. We need to expose this functionality to the relevant clients. So to do this, let's create an appropriate action method within the product controller class. Let's create an extension method to convert the collection of product category objects to a collection of product category DTO objects. This may seem like a pointless exercise, because the shape of the product category class is exactly the same as the shape of the product category DTO class. It is important to understand that even though this step may seem unnecessary, that we are doing this due to design best practices. Why is this a design best practice? In the future, a new requirement may arise, for example, where a client may require additional data to be returned from the relevant action method. We want to maintain a clear separation of concerns between the DTO classes and the corresponding entity classes. The reason for this is that the relevant DTO classes can evolve independently from the relevant entity classes if required, without affecting their counterpart entity classes. So, a DTO class can, for example, be extended without affecting its counterpart entity class. Let's finish off the code for our action method. Great. So let's go to the shoponline.web project and write the calling client code for retrieving a collection of product category data. Let's create the relevant service code. Let's add an appropriate method definition to the iProductService interface. Let's implement the code for the interface that we have just created. So our code in this method is appropriately requesting a collection of objects of type product category DTO from the server. Great. Let's create a Razor component that will be responsible for outputting the product categories as menu items inside our Blazor application's main menu that resides within the sidebar section of our application's UI. So within the shared directory, let's create a Razor component named Product Categories Nav Menu. Let's create a class named Product Categories Nav Menu Base. Let's write code so that an object of type iProductService is injected into our Razor component at runtime. Let's create a property of type iEnumerable that is strongly typed with the product category DTO type. Let's create a string property named errorMessage. Let's override the onInitializedAsync method. Let's create code within the onInitializedAsync method that retrieves a collection of objects of type product category DTO from the server and assigns the returned collection to the product category DTO's property. Great. Let's implement the code for the product categories nav menu Razor file. So we need to create a using directive that references the shoponline.web.pages namespace. So let's add the appropriate using directive to the _imports.razor file. We are adding this using directive because we are going to add appropriate tags to the product categories nav menu Razor file that reference relevant child Razor components that have been added to the pages directory. For example, the display spinner child Razor component. So notice that we are creating a link that contains a category ID parameter. We'll later write code that uses this parameter value to query the server for a collection of product data that is related to a particular category denoted by the relevant category ID value. So we haven't yet written the code for the products by category Razor component. We'll write the code for this Razor component a bit later. This Razor component will contain code for displaying a collection of objects of type product DTO that are related to the category ID value that will be passed as a parameter to the products by category Razor component. So the next step is to reference our new Razor component from within the Razor component that contains the main menu that appears to the user in the sidebar of the UI. So let's add the appropriate tag to reference our product categories nav menu Razor component. Let's run the code. And we can see that our product categories are now appearing as menu items within the sidebar. However, as you can see, the style of the product category menu items are different from the home menu item, because the code that produces the category menu item is contained within a different Razor component. So to solve this, I'm simply going to copy the CSS code from the navmenu.razor.css file and paste it into a new CSS file that we must name product categories navmenu.razor.css. So this will result in the product category menu items being styled like the home menu item. So we are flagrantly violating the principle of dry, don't repeat yourself here. I'm doing this deliberately to keep up the momentum in creating the code for this application, so that I can effectively keep the focus on the aspects that are the subject of this part of the course. You can of course centralize the CSS code for the menu items in adherence with the principle of dry. However, for the reasons I've just explained, I won't address this issue in this part of the course. Great. So let's move on to create the code for filtering the products by category. Let's go back to the shoponline.api project. Let's go to the iProduct repository interface. Let's create a new method definition within the iProduct repository interface. The code that we'll implement for this method will be responsible for retrieving a collection of product data that is related to a particular product category. So let's implement the code for the method that we have just defined within the product repository class. Let's create an appropriate action method to expose this functionality to calling client code. Great. Right, let's go back to the shoponline.web project and implement the service-related code regarding the functionality for retrieving product data related to a particular category ID. Let's open the iProduct service interface and create an appropriate method definition. Let's implement the code logic for the method definition that we have just created. So here we are appropriately requesting a collection of objects of type product DTO that are related to a particular product category. Right, let's create a Razor component responsible for displaying the product data filtered by category on the UI. Let's name this Razor component products by category.razor. Let's create a class named products by category base. Let's implement the code for the products by category base class. Firstly, let's create a property that represents a parameter that will be passed into this Razor component. The value passed into this category ID parameter will be an appropriate category ID value. Note that we are able to declare that a property represents a parameter by decorating the relevant property with the parameter attribute. Let's create the other necessary properties for our Razor component. So, we want our collection of products to be retrieved for a particular category only when the category ID parameter is set. So we can do this by implementing our code within a method that is called by Blazor in response to a lifecycle event occurring when our parameter value is set. So to achieve this, we are overriding a built-in Blazor method named OnParametersSetAsync. I've included a link below in the description for those of you who wish to read more about the OnParametersSetAsync method. So let's write the code within the OnParametersSetAsync method. Our code simply retrieves the appropriate product data from the server based on the value passed into our category ID parameter. Let's write the appropriate UI code within the productsbycategory.razor file. So let's first use the @page directive to appropriately declare the relevant root template information for our products by category Razor component. Let's write code to inherit from the products by category base class. Let's implement the code logic. So as you can see, we can reuse our display products Razor component that we created in a previous part of this course to display the relevant products data to the user. Let's run the code. Excellent! So you can see that our product category menu items appear differently when compared to the home menu item. So let's fix this in code so that our menu items are displayed in a consistent way to the user. Great. Let's finish off by adding an appropriate logo for our application. Excellent. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I look forward to presenting the final video in this series, where we'll optimize our code to potentially create better performance for our application. For content like this and much more, please consider subscribing, and please ring the bell so as to be notified of future content. If you liked this video, please hit the like button, and please feel free to share this video with anyone you feel may benefit from its content. If you'd like to thank me by buying me a coffee, I've included a link to my Buy Me a Coffee webpage. I've also included a PayPal Me link that you can use to support the channel via PayPal. Any support is greatly appreciated. A special thank you to those who have been kind enough to support the channel. It is greatly appreciated. I really enjoy engaging with you in the comments section, so please feel free to leave a comment. The latest code can be found on GitHub. A link to the relevant repository has been included below in the description. Thank you, and take care.